images, I felt like I could not include them. But all of these were taken on, I believe, on reporting trips from one of the 4 panelists here. I am Jenny Morber. I have traveled for reporting to the Amazonian, Ecuadorian Amazon, to Israel and Jordan and Senegal. I've had a wonderful time doing that, and am always learning and trying to keep myself safe and being the best reporter possible. And then we have, here we have Ashley Braun. Ashley, would you like to introduce yourself, or should I read I'll read a little thing about you. Ashley is an award-winning freelance science and environmental journalist whose reporting has taken her from the United Nations Climate Summit in Morocco and Australia's Great Barrier Reef to California's redwood forests and Washington's salmon rivers. Next to Ashley is Woo-Dan. Woo-Dan is an award-winning narrative journalist whose reporting has taken her to the largest refugee camp in the world, the expansive oil palm plantations in Southeast Asia, corners of the former Soviet Union and the US that live in the shadow of nuclear weapons testing, and the rugged mountain ranges of the American West. And finally, on the end, is Lauren Frone. Lauren Frone is the lead video journalist at the Seattle Times, where she produces award-winning, innovative video stories, documentary films, and interactive digital projects. She has reported from many salmon streams, rivers, and forests in the Pacific Northwest, as well as the Galapagos Islands, Liberia, Romania, Slovakia, Haiti, and more. So as you can see, the 4 people here, although we are all women, have been all over the world reporting in different ways, whether through text or through video and images. And so I think we have a nice breadth of experience here. So I'm going to sit down because I feel weird standing up like that. And then the first question I just wanted to ask the panel, and anyone can jump in, is like who you are, how did you get started reporting in far-flung places? Take it away, Lauren.
Okay, I'll break the ice. I would say I got started when right here. Is that better? That's good. Note that. Okay. I would say it started for me when I went to grad school for journalism. When I was an undergrad, I had taken some classes in the journalism school, and I saw these projects where they would like travel to these places and make documentaries about people. And this was like, 2005. And so documentaries for the internet were just, starting to have traction. And I was just like, you can do this, like you can just do this and meet people and see things and kind of step out of your own world and into someone else's. And I was just kind of hooked on that. So I went back to grad school and studied all types of visual multimedia journalism, and I connected with video journalism. And my first like travel assignment or project was actually to the Galapagos Islands, which like at that point it was like, I think that was the first time I had traveled like anywhere out of the country. So it was like 0 to 100 on like, how to be a reporter in a place far away and outside of your own culture. And that was just a really incredible experience and a very good learning experience. And, you kind of have to learn to travel and do your job. And that's kind of a lot to learn all at once. And then, I feel like every experience since then has been a learning experience. Like you learn something new or a better way to do things or a better way to exist in other places. And that's kind of how I started.
Just to follow on what Lauren was saying, I got my start, and maybe this gave me the taste for field reporting. I actually was an environmental science major in undergraduate studies. And so I was in chest waders with these big long dip nets out in these ponds in the North Woods of Wisconsin doing research with graduate students. And I was like, this is really fun. I'm trying to catch, tadpoles and everything and try to, learn these things about feedback. And try to uncover new things about the natural world, and I found it really exciting. But also I eventually realized that I didn't want to be a scientist myself, but I'd always enjoyed writing and learning and communicating. And so eventually I got into environmental journalism, and eventually made my way to Australia for my first field reporting assignment, which was also far flung. And also I had to figure out how to report internationally. And I ended up traveling there for one story that I got commissioned from Science, the journal, their news side of the journal. And I ended up I'm traveling to Australia. There are so many reporting opportunities, and I'm also like having to basically fundraise the ticket to get there because the magazine was only paying for my in-country expenses. So I had to, look for other reporting opportunities, and I ended up reporting both the story on in the Australian Outback, and then also on the Great Barrier Reef for another publication. So there were all kinds of learning experiences there, and it's been, just kind of echoing what Lauren was saying, an education ever since, and a real joy too. It's some of the most fun and exhausting parts of the job.
Yeah, I came into reporting internationally a little differently. So before I lived in Seattle, I moved to Bangkok, and that was in 2015. And I moved there because before that I was in New York City, and getting accustomed to the community of science writers there, I was like, everyone is covering the same story from the same press release. I don't think that's for me. And I just remember, being really interested in infectious diseases. And I went to a talk, and somebody was like, yeah, Southeast Asia is ground zero for infectious diseases. And I was like, yeah, let's go. The ambition that you have in your mid-20s. So I packed up all my belongings, moved to Bangkok, and within 4 days of arriving there, I was downtown with the former New York Times Southeast Asia correspondent getting drinks when a bomb went off outside of the bar. You can't make this shit up. And so very quickly, I'm like, well, people probably like, Tom had to go cover it for the New York Times. And I was like, well, what am I gonna do? And I was like, I got in a taxi. I didn't have any of my reporting stuff. I went back to my flat, got my notebook, got a recorder, got my passport, went back out. Meanwhile, I'm like texting frantically with friends that I know at the Washington Post and like Time and places like that. And I ended up stringing that night for the Washington Post. And what a weird experience it is to report in a language that you absolutely cannot speak in a country that you just landed in 4 days ago. So that was the start of it. And, I kind of just started like really taking note that breaking news is not for me. I kind of recognized it in that moment. And I had moved to Thailand knowing the types of stories I did want to cover. And so, but like my focal point of home had also shifted. Home was now Bangkok in Southeast Asia. Little did I know I would move back here. But by the time I moved back in 2016, I moved here. And I kind of just like made this promise to myself that I would try to go back there every single year, find one story or one nugget that I found interesting the year before and go back. I wanted to snowbird basically in Southeast Asia, which is a funny thing to do. But yeah, that was the start.
Wow, that's a story. I did not know that about you, Woo-Dan. So I know that for Woo-Dan anyway, the story kind of started the bomb fell in her lap, so to speak. But these days, when you go out looking for stories, like how do you find good stories if you're not in the place where if it's not in the place where you live. I think people getting started probably wonder, how do you even know what's going on in those places? How do you find those stories? And then how do you decide, yes, this is like one that's worth traveling for?
I think for me, it's been finding the story. I think if you talk to magazine editors, they'll be like, never start with the topic, or like, don't pitch me a topic, pitch me a story with a person and like action and tension and drama and resolution. Like, don't pitch me a topic. But I think if you're interested in a topic, it's worthwhile seeing where that topic takes place in the world. Like, I think following your interest and following your nose, or following my nose rather, is kind of what I do. And once I identify where a thing takes place, I do as much reading as I possibly can without, spending too many unpaid hours on it. And then one thing I do, and I encourage everyone to do to follow a story that's happening elsewhere, is set up a Google alert. Now, technology, it's only as dumb and gives you as bad feedback as what you feed into it. True of Google, true of GPT-4, true of virtually anything. And so I set up specific Google alerts for everything I have an interest in. And so instead of like obsessively checking back on it, I can check on it like every 2 weeks or every month or whatever cadence I'm able to fulfill at a given moment, because I freelance, I have other projects going on, life is busy. But kind of giving myself a check-in point on all my Google alerts for topics kind of helps me stay up to date. And if there's something interesting or newsworthy, then I kind of use that as the hook to sell to an editor. And that nuisance is only something, you can really cultivate through practice.
I would say another way that I have ended up field reporting unexpectedly has been just through cultivating relationships, which I think is something that's really important just in general in reporting, whether like close to home or far away from home. And I would also just clarify too that I think for me, field reporting doesn't necessarily mean that it's far away from home. I would say that if you're out, sort of like, I don't know, like if you're not at your desk, yeah, then you're in a laboratory, you are like observing, events unfolding in the real world, you are field reporting. But just to give an example, which builds on what Woo-din was saying, following my interests and my curiosity. This was back in 2017. I ended up attending the Ecological Society of America conference, which was happening in Portland. And I was, I think, staying with friends and, trying to do it cheap, but also just attending some of these different scientific sessions and learning about some of these topics that I was interested in. And I set up a few interviews with researchers whose fields seemed interesting to me. And one researcher was a fire ecologist who was also Indigenous, who worked with the Forest Service. And we had maybe a 25-minute conversation, and I recorded it and kind of tucked it away. And eventually, we kind of kept in touch over the years. And I reached out to him at one point, I think it was maybe 3 years ago. And he ended up putting me in touch with someone who eventually became the main character of a story in the Sierra Nevada mountains focused on cultural burning, and, ended up taking me on this whole unexpected journey. And I ended up, using some of these quotes from our original 25-minute conversation years earlier, because I didn't at the time have the understanding of what he was telling me. I had to give myself the time to cultivate that expertise. And so, again, it's just, you really have to, kind of keep building on these relationships and, kind of see where it all takes you, and kind of keep checking in on them.
I don't know that I have too much more to add. Except that I agree that, stories kind of beget more stories. You make connections, someone mentions something and you're like, oh, that would be interesting. Like, can you give me their contact info? And like leads to new stories, especially reporting in this region. That tends to be how we find stories and go out in the field. And I agree, field is like anytime you're out, and as a video journalist, I every assignment is I'm in the field. So that's kind of a regular part of things. And then I think slightly different, being on staff is different. I always admire how Wudan manages her time, which could be its own panel. But I have the luxury of like spending time pre-reporting. Like I can talk to people on the phone. I can find out every single thing that's going to be happening. Like just the other week, we were filming a steelhead test fishery, and before it, like I was able to spend like an hour on the phone with one of the biologists who was running the study to find out like how the whole thing happened, so I could be very prepared and I knew that it would be worthwhile for me to go into the field and do that. So for me, that's how I kind of decide, is doing a lot of that upfront pre-reporting, finding out everything that's happening that I know would be a good opportunity, and finding the characters that I want to follow, things like that.
Yeah, I just, for you, Lauren, just thinking about how every single story, since you're a visual journalist, you're literally there for every single thing. That would be, I have a lot of admiration for you doing that, because I can often call people up on the phone and get the information that I need, but every single one you have to be there. But I will say that I think most every story that I've ever worked on either was improved or could be improved by actually going to the place and seeing the stuff done. And I don't know about you three, but I'm always amazed when I ask someone if I could like show up in their place of work or follow them around, and they say yes. And to me, that's one of the best, most exciting parts of being a journalist is people will say yes to like my crazy ideas, like, oh, you're snorkeling and this place, how about I come? And they actually let me come. Whereas I think it's just incredible. And I am so thankful for people providing that access. And then I feel a great responsibility to share that with the public and the rest of people. So for someone just getting started, oh, do we have a question? Okay, let's take questions. Okay, so, and I want to tell our live audience, feel free to ask questions. So the question is, can you repeat that? When is, okay, so when do you decide if a story is worth pursuing in the field, particularly far-flung and expensive? So there's a big, bar to clear there.
Is somebody paying me, or can somebody pay me real fast? Again, freelancing, right? Like otherwise I have thousands of dollars of credit card bills to front. But yeah, so I think cluing editors into first of all, let's start with the story itself. Do I believe the story is going to make a difference? Okay, yes, check that box. Do I have somebody who's going to pay me for the work? Hopefully, yes. Third, is somebody going to pay me? Sometimes the outlet, like journalism, is dying. So outlets usually are not paying me directly, but knowing how to get a grant in pretty short time, or getting creative, like intentionally getting a credit card a few months in advance and getting enough points to get you a free flight is a thing I've done before. So yeah, if you can stack all those things up, I think it's a go.
Yeah, I would also say a lot of times it's not me deciding, it's editors, my bosses deciding. But like my job or my colleagues' jobs when I, because I collaborate with reporters and photographers, is to do that upfront legwork to pitch it to them and have a strong enough pitch that says what the difference will be, why it's unique, why this story needs to be told. Like the job is really to convince people. And so you kind of have to believe it. I'm curious, for the freelancers here, that like for us, that's like a lot of upfront work, right? To like report out a story that is pitchable. And I'm curious how that works for you all, that like, and how you spend your time.
It is. Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, that's a lot of unpaid time that we spend. I value those editors, or I could just send 2 sentences and say, I have a story, this is what I want to be about. And they say, go. They keep dropping in my experience. Those editors move and or go other places. But yeah, there's a lot of overhead.
The other thing that I would add is what can going to this far-flung expensive place like add to this story that trying to report it from behind your desk, like what is going to be added here, right? Is it going to be like this is a technique, or like, are you going to watch like coral spawning under the moonlight as researchers try to like observe some kind of event that has never been observed before, something like that, right? Is there some kind of magical moment that you are capturing, in which case like that really ups the stakes for whether it's worth it. And then you have this unique story that you can pitch to an editor and be like, hey, I'm worth, sending for thousands and thousands of dollars.
I'll get to your question really quick. I
I
was
have something to add.
okay. Go for it.
I came up in this industry knowing a lot of photo and video journalists, actually. And so, when I thought about story, I actually thought about my written story panning out in scenes in front of me. And, print, audio, whatever, we can all think of ourselves as really siloed. But for me, telling a story has always been very cinematic. And so if I'm envisioning my story as a documentary, I always think about what are the scenes, and if those scenes are gettable in the field, then I will go.
I'm gonna get this gentleman's question in just a second. I just wanted to give a quick anecdote. Recently I pitched a story about quiet tourism in the Amazon. And so I went there because I wanted to talk to the people, the indigenous people who were there, to find out if that was actually something they wanted or something they thought would be useful. And it turned out that they did, which was great. But also I realized by being there that the place we stayed was covered by millions of giant hairy spiders, and probably not a lot of American tourists anyway would be really comfortable pooing in a hole with a bunch of giant spiders. So that's information that I would not have gotten otherwise. There's a gentleman in the back with a question.
We do it all ourselves.
Yes, lady in the back. Okay, let's see. So this is pomegranates in a market in Tel Aviv. This is the vegetables in Israel as a as a crop. That's Lauren. That's Wudan and the mangroves. And if I'm incorrect, please correct me. This is me about to embark on a boat further upriver into the start of an Amazon tributary in Ecuador. This is Ashley at Great Barrier Reef. some of these are on 10 seconds and some are on 5. This is Lauren. Lauren, what are you doing here?
I am in Sockeye Stream on Vancouver Island, northern Vancouver Island. Yeah.
That's the toilet surrounded by giant hairy spiders. We literally had to have a person with a stick stand next to you while you were going. Yeah. Oh, Dan, I think that's yours. Oh my God.
That is not me.
Okay.
Well, I took that photo.
You took that photo. That's
That photo. That person is obviously not me.
That's
that-
Ashley.
yeah.
This is me and Jordan having a nice sit on the dunes in between reporting duties. This is Lauren.
I'm actually reporting locally in Seattle on homelessness during the pandemic, like right at the start. You can see I have Clorox wipes, and hand sanitizer.
I'm not reporting. I'm just rock climbing.
Yeah, I was showing her resourcefulness, like as an outdoors woman here. I think this image was it taken by you, Virginia?
Yeah, that was on the same trip for turmeric last year. They're drying all the turmeric out in the field.
This is Ashley.
That's in the Sierra Nevada, a cultural burning, basically like a prescribed fire that indigenous peoples use in order to encourage cultural resources that they use in ceremonies and food.
That's a spice market.
This is a extreme ice swimmer off of Alki. She swims in like 40-degree water.
Wow.
Oh, this is actually the first assignment in the field I had after coming back from maternity leave, and I look happy for some reason.
This is just a headshot. That's really nice. Looks like you're outside though. Oh, Gasworks Park. The field can be anywhere.
This is from Liberia. I was doing a story about early childhood education.
That's a beautiful photo.
Oh, and that's also on Vancouver Island, crawling through an old growth forest. Really staying on that.
Also from California.
Oh, this is an old photo. Where did you find this?
The internet.
The internet never dies. Yeah, I did a big investigation on oil palm back in 2016, one of my first.
This is another that was a farm in Israel. Yes, another question.
Science writing. How do you judge your audience? How do you know what level you want to write the story at? You're going to have a broad range of people, and how do you appeal to all the different levels of readership?
So the question is basically, how do you adjust your level of science communication to the appropriate audience and their understanding? And that's going to depend. So for the independent journalists up here, that's going to depend on the publications that we're writing for. If I'm writing for a publication like Science, their audience are working scientists, but they're also usually, specialists in their own unique discipline. So usually it's a lot of PhDs, but I also have to, keep in mind that they're not going to know every specific detail about whatever the discipline is that I'm writing in. But if you're writing for, a newspaper like the Seattle Times, then that's going to be a different level of, a broader readership that is familiar with the region that you're, that you're in. Or if you're writing for a national audience, or, I don't want to speak for Lauren, but that's maybe just an example of how you would, judge your level of science communication. Or if you're writing for children, for example, then you're going to adjust, the type of jargon that you're using or how much you're explaining different types of concepts, the level of detail.
Thank you. I want to talk about some of the criticism that is rightly thrown toward people. I'll just say like me, someone who's a white American journalist who shows up in another country, in another culture, and wants to suddenly report on issues that I think are important to these people. And this is called parachute journalism. And there are rightly criticisms about doing this. And I think there are ways that we can mitigate that for communities, and ways that we can be better. And so I would like to ask the panel, is this something that you think about when you travel for journalism? And if so, how do you kind of work to avoid the pitfalls of this type of parachute journalism?
This is on. The prep that I do when I'm embarking on an international trip, especially if it's a country I've never been to, a location that I've never been to, is actually not familiarize myself with the story, but to familiarize myself with the culture of the place. You can do this in a number of ways. You can talk to colleagues who have reported in that location. As you're hiring for a local field producer, you can ask them questions. The internet is a great resource. We love google.com. And so I think being really educated about that. So for instance, most of my international work has been in South and Southeast Asia. I am going to keep my body covered, shoulders, knees at all times, like no matter what, basically, because of the religions that they practice. And even though it's, 110 degrees and humid, like I will still be covered because I don't want to stand out. Like I think that's another thing for me too, is just to make other people feel comfortable with me, so that they can share their stories. The other thing, we might talk about this later, especially in working in foreign countries where you can't speak the language, you need to hire a translator, a driver, so on and so forth for field logistics, is to make sure that you're paying them well, or paying them, period. Some horror stories out there, really. And also to kind of like, there are lots of conventional rules about journalists here, right? Like if somebody tries to pay for a coffee, I will fight them tooth and nail. If somebody wants to cook me a meal and invite them in their house so I can interview them for a story in like rural Bangladesh, I'm not gonna care. Like it'll be more rude for me to fight them on that, right? So what is it? What is it to me? Some rules kind of go out the window, I will say, or it can be a little more flexible depending on what we're talking about. But that was just like a light example. Yeah, so, but I think the important thing is like just to spend time with them to make sure that you're really getting things right. The whole term parachute journalism is like kind of the, not to be crass, but like wham bam, thank you ma'am, like got the story, peace out of here thing. And I think that's the trope that we should all strive to strive against when we're working overseas.
Yeah, I would say, I think anytime you're stepping outside of your culture, I think doing the upfront work to understand, like, for example, I've done stories or within indigenous communities in and around Seattle, and that has a whole like protocol essentially to follow. So you don't even have to go somewhere very far away to encounter these ways of not intruding or like overstepping into people's communities. A lot of tribal communities, you need to go to the elders first. Like you talk to them first, you get their buy-in, and that's like a show of respect. And that can unlock access to other things. And so I think anytime, learning how communities show respect and adhering to that, I think is like the number one step. And then, explaining why you're there, what you hope for, and then listening. I think those are like the major things when you first embark on a story, to make sure that that they understand your purpose and you understand what they want out of the process as well, because you're sharing their story essentially.
Yeah, and just following up on that, as part of the process of not being extractive, making sure that once you have, published the story, if there's a way for you to easily share that story back with that community, or share some of the photos or something that you have taken, like here is an easy way for me to like reciprocate with that culture in that community, then I think that's an easy way for journalists to I would say like make amends for some of the sins of this industry, which has been very extractive like historically. And yeah.
Following up, yes, Bryn, did you have a question? So you raise your hand. Okay. I was just gonna follow up on that a little, and Dan touched on this, and that is often when you or I have been in foreign locations, I have been very reliant on the help of others. I had someone who was a translator, and she helped me find sources. She brought me around. She was just invaluable. And then also she secured for me a driver, safe drivers, which was really important. This was in Senegal, and we went way out into villages, and there's no way I would have been able to speak to the people I did. I called this woman at the time a fixer. I've learned recently that that term is not not PC, or actually just not like a fully encompassing the important role that these helpers have. This person would now be called a local field producer. It's kind of makes the person more of a partner. But the question is for the panel, have you used people like this before? And how is, if someone really wants to go to another location and they're ready to do field reporting, how do they go about finding these invaluable helpers?
I feel very lucky that my previous experience, on staff has has made that a little bit easier. I can imagine if you're freelancing a story or embarking on a story, starting one on your own, it can be hard to make those connections. When I worked for the Open Society Foundations in New York, we would often connect with people in the local offices who had programs that we like funded, things like that. Like not me personally, but like the foundation funds their work. And so we know people who work there. And a lot of times those folks are great to connect you with people on the ground, people who are experiencing this thing. I wouldn't say that's relegated only if you work for a big foundation that funds people, like finding those local organizations that are doing work. That can be a great way to not to sort of like connect with folks you might feature in your story. That's been my experience. And then the times where I've had like, maybe the term fixer actually, like I haven't used the phrase in a long time, so I don't know if it applies, but like I've had people who are drivers / translators. So they're not helping me find people necessarily, but they are taking me places and then helping me just communicate. So like even in Liberia where they speak English, it's kind of like a different type of English, and having someone who can like culturally translate for you and explain to you what's going on sometimes is really helpful. And like one time when I went to Haiti, a similar situation. We had a driver slash translator, and we actually found him through other journalists. So this was in the wake of the earthquake there. And so we knew people who had gone there, and they connected us with him as like someone who would help keep you safe and would be able to help you communicate with folks, things like that. So I've always worked with people who weren't necessarily doing reporting work, but I mean, maybe they do fit that producer role in that way too.
The question was how to find a producer. Yeah, there's a Facebook group that you can wait like 10 months to get into because they're so slow to approve you. Or my tact is look for pieces published in the country I'm about to go to, see who's reported stories in a similar region, and just contact the reporter and ask if they would be happy to connect me with who they worked with in the field. And chances are they're going to be excited to do so, unless they had a terrible experience. Yeah, there's a distinction here, right? Because sometimes the places that you go to, you may just need a translator if you know the people who you're going to interview. The places where I hire a local field producer are when I am thinking about the story, thinking about the categories of people who I want to interview, and know that I have no way in hell of getting to them myself. And that is when I hire a field producer. And then they also translate, but they may also have drivers that they enjoy working with, and so on and so forth. So it unlocks that kind of network. But I think getting clear about what it is that you actually need. You might ask about this later on, but I had a horrible experience working in Kazakhstan. The person who I thought I was hiring as a field producer could not produce to save his life, to the point where I was arranging my own interviews in the hotel. But he could translate. I put him to work translating, and that was fine. And I ended up just producing and directing everything, which was a hilarious chain of events. But yeah, kind of depends on what you need. There's a distinction between when you need a translator versus a field producer.
I think this lady here had a question. What was your question, ma'am? You mean the US? But I mean, I will say the most unsafe I've ever felt was reporting in Western North Carolina. The question is, how do you deal in areas where women are not the same or as safe as men? Yeah, and the panel is talking about the United States. I'll give you, well, what I like to do is I always have someone with me. I have learned about myself that I don't always make good choices that help keep me safe. So I really like to travel with someone. For instance, I went on that field reporting trip to Senegal. I have my person. She has secured for me a driver. Me and my friend fly into Dakar. Now need to take a 4-hour car ride to another city up the coast. So our driver finds us. We're going along. We've been in the car maybe 45 minutes, and there's a bunch of police on the road, and they just point. And if they point at you, you have to pull over. And they see us, and they point at us, and we pull over. And the next thing I know, the driver and the police are arguing. And then the driver comes back and gets a bunch of papers and goes back. And this goes on for about 15 minutes, and it's escalating and escalating and escalating. And they're screaming at each other. And I have no idea what's going on. I am still jet lagged, and I'm like, what's going on? And the driver comes in, he's like, you are Christian missionaries. And I'm like, I am a Christian missionary. And so we were Christian missionaries for about 5 minutes. And it turned out that what had happened was that the policeman thought that we were being human trafficked up to a country that was nearby that's well known for human trafficking. And he wanted a kickback of our trafficking price. So like, there's no way that I could have predicted that I would end up in this situation. But just having people around me, like, so this driver who I had just met 45 minutes ago, he kept us safe. He was like, I'm not paying bribes. And I was like, we can pay bribes, you know. He's like, I'm not paying bribes. You're going to pretend to be Christian missionaries. This is going to be fine. So one of the things I do is, like, you can do as much research as you want, but I like to surround myself with people who know the culture, with just a friend, because I'm not by myself. Also my friend is like, I'm pretty petite. My girlfriend is like, you know, has, she's a large lady and people don't mess with her. So.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add to that is, well, yes, strength in numbers for sure. And also, have you done a HEAT or HEFAT training? Yeah, so HEFAT is not an insult. It stands for Hostile Environment and First Aid Training. A lot of international aid workers do it, and anyone deployed into conflict or post-conflict zones usually do something like this. Hostile environment, well, the US, I was joking, but I'm also not. I covered a lot of the protests in 2020. And yes, I would describe that as a hostile environment. But what they do in these trainings is they literally put you through like simulations of like, you're reporting in a foreign country, you are pulled over, the police are here, like you are in basically an active shooter drill. Like, what do you do? When do you run? What if somebody comes and takes you hostage? Like, I think all of this, you know, what it does is train you, kind of accustom you to these actually very possible, plausible, and scary situations, and teaches you a way to work through them. And also, importantly, develop situational awareness, because at the end of the day, we can have other people with us who, I mean, that this is where the term fixer came up, right? Like in war zones, like there's a fight, people are fighting. You're the problem. I'm the problem. And that fixer is going to fix the entire situation and make it go away so I can do my job. That's basically how the term came about. And so, you know, I kind of I hate that. I hate that for a lot of reasons, but we got to take responsibility for ourselves and develop our own situational awareness.
I agree with all of that. I think situational awareness is key, and having people you trust around you is really important, which is why, like, when you do have drivers, translators that you're working with, like having them recommended from peers and colleagues is like really helpful. It's not just anyone. You know, and not everyone has like a LinkedIn thing, you know, it's like you're connecting with someone that you're just meeting and kind of putting your life in their hands sometimes. I would say, you know, I've in Liberia, we had a very interesting experience with our like translator driver folks, in that, like, we wanted to go to a family's house kind of on the outskirts of Liberia, of the city, and we had to get there at like 3 o'clock in the morning, because that's like when they get up and light their fire and start their day, and we wanted to be there for that. And we were discussing that plan with the folks who were driving us and or helping us coordinate, and they were just like, oh, we can't drive at night, like we can't be out at night. And you know, we kind of like, I was with a photographer, and she and I were, and she's Andrea Bruce, she's like photographed everywhere. We were both like, okay, let's piece this apart a little bit. Like, why can't we go? And it was really interesting because, like, I mean, people in Liberia have been through so much civil war, there's so much trauma, and like, once we sort of talked it through with them, they felt like there were going to be gangs of people blocking the roads and ready to attack us everywhere when it was dark. And like, not that we didn't trust them, but like their experience, their memories, like, were sort of coloring how they thought of things in the present. And so we were able to convince them, like, let's try and go. And if we're feeling uncomfortable or uneasy, we will turn around and come back. Like, we know the route, we have it planned, we know where we're going. we're gonna discuss that. And if anyone's feeling uncomfortable, we will turn around and come back. And so then like the next day we set out at like 2 o'clock in the morning or something. And like the city was so quiet. Like Monrovia, it was so quiet. It was kind of eerie, but then there was just nothing going on. It was so normal. There wasn't any scary people in the streets or gangs roaming around. And like by the end of that week, these two guys just like loved driving around in the middle of the night with us. Like they were just having like the best time. They're like, are we going out again at 3 a.m. tomorrow? Like they were so excited. And so that was sort of like a reverse situation where it was like we were kind of pushing them out of their comfort zone a little bit. And so it was like an interesting learning experience for all of us to like discuss like what are these real dangers. That being said, we did end up having to bribe someone at one point on that trip, but because we had gone into like this abandoned building where it's like an abandoned hotel that's like all decrepit and there's like no windows or anything. And we were filming from the top of it. And as we were leaving, this like security guard was coming, and our translator, he started to freak out, and he's like, we're gonna have to bribe him. And I was like, what? We have to bribe him? He's the security guard. And like, I'm thinking like, I'm gonna have to give him like all the cash I have. And I was like, what kind of bribe are we talking here? And he was like, probably like $5. And I was like, all right, let's bribe him. But I don't think there was any issue with like safety in that case. That was just like a guy who charged admission basically for people to go in this abandoned building. But yeah, that was just an interesting experience in Liberia.
Okay, we have two questions from. Okay, the question is, do you credit drivers and translators and helpers in the story? And if so, what was the second part? How do you do so?
Kind of easy in video because there's like a credits screen with like films. At the end of a film, we can like credit translator, local producer, or any or even just like special thanks to people. I don't know that we've ever listed like a driver in the credits, but like might be a special thanks sort of thing. I don't know how it works for written stories.
Yeah, in print, it depends on the outlet. So drivers almost never get credited, unless they play a bigger role in field production or translation. The thing about crediting field producers is that if you're working on a really sensitive story, we get to leave, they live there. And so naming them could also potentially risk them. So the first thing I always do is say, I would like to credit you for this work. How do you feel about that? And go from there. And kind of align that with how an outlet handles things. I mean, I worked on many, many, many stories where my field producers were like, I don't need that. And play very few publications will say, so in a recent story, it'll be like first name, last name contributed, like field production and translation for this story or something like that. It's very specific. Yeah.
I would say most of the time, the best way to credit them is to pay them a livable wage that is comparable to what you would make in the US. So like, even though you could potentially pay someone like very little in US dollars where you are, like paying them the rate you would pay someone in the US, if you're able to, I think that's the best way to credit somebody. It's like pay them for what they're worth, especially if they're keeping you safe.
Is there another question in the audience? Yeah. The question is, do we chase an exciting story before we have a guaranteed payoff?
I have. The payoff wasn't great. It was like $500 bucks. But I mean, this was earlier in my career and I wasn't making the same business decisions as I am now. I think if there's something exciting, a really big development happening in a story, and if you think it's really gonna enhance not only the story itself, but your ability to sell it, then sure.
I guess in a different sense of like the payoff, my experience in Australia that took me to the Great Barrier Reef, I did not have a commission for the story. I had been reporting on this type of coral predator that basically I was going to go out and see it in the wild, basically with some people who were, you know, scuba diving, and I was going to be snorkeling and everything. And I was like taking the risk, going out and doing some of this reporting in the field and fronting the expenses for it. And I had been pitching, you know, this story to multiple publications, like before my trip, during my trip. And the day that I was flying from Townsville, Australia, which is like where I had been like reporting on the reef, back to like my base of operations in Australia at my friend's house in Brisbane, I got the news from Medium, the outlet that ultimately commissioned the story, that they were accepting it. And so it was like, great. And they were going to pay enough to cover my expenses too. So it was like, okay, that was like a payoff for sure. So I took some risks, had, you know, a great experience field reporting, and it worked out. So
sometimes even having commission is no guarantee though. Sometimes the story changes, like in the case of the hairy spiders. I had another story, the one in Senegal, where I went out and I had a commission and they were paying for travel and it was great. And I get back and I have a call from my editor and the magazine is folding. So she did me a solid and actually paid for it, but that story still hasn't run. I want to get myself back there and follow up and find out what's going on. But yeah, that happens too. One thing I wanted to make sure to ask everyone is kind of, you talk about, I think these anecdotes are like really interesting. So can you tell me like one of your best moments field reporting and or one of your worst moments?
I'll start with best or one of, you know, I would say, so I've referenced this trip to Liberia from several years ago, a lot of years ago. I feel like that was one where, you know, we had done a lot of work. This was for the Open Society Foundations, and it was a story about early childhood education in Liberia. And I feel like it was one of those stories where we put in a ton of effort up front before we left to identify people. Like we had someone on the ground who was like connecting with a family who had small children, that we were going to follow their story, and like in a million ways it could have fallen through and like not worked out, but like that was a trip where like everything really like went super well. Like we were able to drive through the streets of Monrovia in the middle of the night without any problem, aside from bribing the security guard. But like when and it's like one of those situations where like everything I filmed, I was just like, this is beautiful. Like it just like went really well. And I think it was because we did all that prep work, and we like were able to find the folks who could help us find the people that we wanted to document. And yeah, I remember every step of the way, it just worked. Like we got to their house. It was this beautiful setting where they were all getting ready, and it was like nighttime. And then we rode the bus with them, like one of these, it was almost like a Vanagon kind of bus. And then like went to the school, and there was no problems with access. Like that had already been worked out. And then when the school day was over, like I remember this one shot I got of them like riding up this like family of 4 on like one motorcycle. It's like, and I got it because we planned. We were like, we're gonna go ahead of you. We're gonna like, so everything just worked out well. Like that was the best. That's the best scenario. I would say one of the worst scenarios was where like nothing worked out at all. I actually went to Australia for another story about education. Um, this was like about a program that they were diverting kids from homelessness through this program at the schools. And we thought we had like secured access, that we talked to everyone we needed to, that we had identified people we were going to work with, and like we were going to have access to these like meetings and stuff. And we got there and everyone was like, no, of course you can't film any of this stuff. Like, no. And we're like, but we all had a conference call, like we were ready, like you all said yes. And then, we made something work, but like it was a pretty dismal week where nothing panned out like we wanted it to. So it's like you can do all the same legwork and have a completely different outcome. It just depends. Nothing's a sure thing. Sorry, that was a bit long.
Yeah, I think the best field reporting experiences are the ones where the story is like coming alive before your eyes and you hardly have to do minimal work. Just have to be there and interview. Yeah, I would say the best moment of field reporting was probably last year when I traveled to Bangladesh to learn about how they were dealing with lead that was getting into their turmeric supply. And we were out in the country. We budgeted for 5 days and it was like day 3 and I was getting interviews and interesting information, but I'm a narrative storyteller. Like my stories hinge a lot on characters, they hinge a lot on place, and had a lot of great place details. And I hadn't found a character yet. Until we went to this like random turmeric spice market on a Tuesday or something, and just wandering around. And it turns out that we're in the backyard of this guy who runs a factory. He kind of like got into adding lead when he was polishing his turmeric. He talked about it. He tied it into the researchers who like did the study. And like, we had drawn a big crowd. I had only asked like 3 questions, but they were like the key questions that told me that he was going to be my main character. And it was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that worked out because nothing was working out before. And I just remember like getting back to my hotel room that night and I wrote the entire story. And I hadn't even finished reporting, but I had like outlined the piece and figured out where he would appear. And that was like, I'm such a nerd. I love these breakthroughs. And I also like can't help but to write. The worst was probably my Kazakhstan experience, where I was not expecting to produce the story in the same way. I was, expected. I thought I hired a local field producer, not just a translator. But that was actually a very, I can be like, oh, I was so frustrated in the moment, which I for sure was. And I was like sharing a hotel room with this guy because my budget was so limited and nature wasn't giving me more money. Anyway, so, I was like, I can't curse this guy out, but I really, really, really am dying to fire him, but I'm very much so shit out of luck if I do. Really tough situation. And so I kind of just like turned it around and what did I tell myself? I was like, it's kind of empowering to be in a country where you can't speak the language and like don't know any of these connections, but like just by priming my translator with the right questions, that can unlock everything that I'm looking for. And that was really cool. Although I wish I didn't have to do that.
Some of the best moments from field reporting, I feel like came from a story that I wrote that appeared on the cover of Audubon magazine like a year and a half ago about the northern spotted owl, which some of you may be familiar with. appeared on the endangered species list back in 1990 and triggered the timber wars and a lot of loggers versus environmentalists type tension. And turns out that owl is still in trouble today, and in part for a different reason. And I was going, I had to go to Northern California to find a northern spotted owl. But some of the like best scenes of field reporting came from the threat to the northern spotted owl from the barred owl, which we have also here in Seattle. The barred owl is originally from the East Coast and is encroaching on northern spotted owl territory. So there are these basically like bigger, more aggressive owls that are out competing the more timid specialist northern spotted owls. So I'm out going with a biologist after nightfall in the truck, and he has a 12 gauge shotgun because we are barred owl hunting. And we're putting out PA systems calling the barred owls to come in. And you're like, do I want the barred owls to come in? Like, and everybody, I mean, the biologist is also like, you can just tell how much he respects and cares for these birds. And so like, you can feel all of like the turmoil just everywhere. And I mean, and there's a photographer and a photographer's assistant who's also with me. And, we're all sort of, kind of chattering about like, are we going to find the owls and that kind of a thing. And, and eventually, we get, one owl to come, and the reason why they respond to these calls is because they're territorial, and they're like, who's in my territory? And basically like, one comes in to investigate and eventually meets its fate with the shotgun, and then its mate also gets called in. And so I am there, and it's dark, and we have, headlamps, and basically the biologist is doing like basically the animal equivalent of an autopsy on these, not an autopsy exactly, we know what killed them, but on the back of a pickup truck, right? And you can just see like these, they're like feathers that are just like drifting on like the gravel road, like snow. And I just remember seeing like these details like that. And I couldn't have gotten that phoning in this story and, from my desk. And I remember, the biologist taking one of the dead owls after he had, taken out its stomach contents to examine what it had eaten, because they eat pretty much anything. And he had taken out half of a Pacific salamander, giant salamander, which was pretty big. Anyway, so he flips over this bird, gently so that he can, so that the photographer can take some photos. And he just catches, there's just this like flick of his wrist as he's just kind of gently smoothing the feathers of this bird that he had to just kill because he's trying to help save this endangered other owl. And you could just see the tenderness in that moment. And, these are the details that I'm gathering and that I'm putting into like the opening scenes of this story, and just trying to capture the complexity of this issue. And so that was, like Woo Dan was saying, sometimes the story just sort of writes itself when you're out there and you're you don't know those details that you're going to be, gathering. So you're just trying to be a sponge and write down everything and look at what is just unfolding around you. Worst moments, what comes to mind? I fortunately haven't had any like really horrible moments, but I have had some where plans have changed, and I was supposed to be, I like flew to San Diego thinking I was going to be spending like 5 days camping in the Mojave Desert with some researchers who were studying native pollinators. And instead their plans changed, and they're like, now we're going to be mostly in San Diego, like at Torrey Pines State Park, like, which is great. It's beautiful. but we had this like really cheap campsite, which was the only one that they could get because they were also like, you know, trying to afford what they could in very expensive real estate in San Diego, because they're spending weeks gathering data. And so our campsite is like next to the train tracks. And so we're literally like sleeping next to the train tracks as the train's barreling by overnight. And so I'm not getting great sleep. And I also like packed a certain way because I thought it was going to be in the desert for 5 days. So I didn't pack regular shampoo. I packed dry shampoo, but there actually were like regular showers, but then I felt weird about like using dry shampoo. It was just very weird for hygiene that week. Anyway, so sometimes field reporting has weird, like you just kind of have to roll with it and just see where it takes you. But sometimes it takes you to like the Rite Aid where you're buying like weird wax earplugs to like put in overnight so that you can get a halfway decent night's sleep so that you can do your basic job. So yeah.
Michael, did you have a question on Zoom? Oh gosh, it's just about time. Well, can we take like another just really quick 5 minutes? I just wanted to really quickly ask each panelist kind of if you have anything exciting coming up. So are there any new stories you guys have coming up? Always. You have new places you're headed, or?
I'll just say really quickly, I'm heading to Oregon the first week of May for a wildfire field fellowship with the Institute for Journalism and Natural Resources. So doing lots of field reporting and hopefully pitching stories out of that. So that will be exciting.
I'm working on a story about steelhead right now with my colleague Fiona, who's also working on it. And it's sort of looking at, you know, how it's been put up for listing on the peninsula, which is like, you know, undammed wild rivers, and the steelhead are still doing terribly there in addition to everywhere else, and what that means for the state and the people who care about that fish, including tribal nations and fly fishermen, anglers. Yeah, so that, I don't know when that's going to come out, but I've been working on it.
I've been out in the field quite a bit, working on a story that I cannot disclose to an audience like this, and definitely not because it's recorded on Zoom. It is vaguely about natural disaster preparedness, and my next field day is going to be somewhere along a river bend looking for a metallic little hut of some type.
Ooh,
Yeah.
wow, that's exciting.
Sorry, that's so scary.
No, I think that's
Yeah.
great. I think it's
What can I say?
mystery. I just wanted to thank everyone for coming. Thank you so much. We had great questions. Thank you so much to our panelists. It's been fantastic. And yeah, have a good evening, everyone.